if you're new to Star Citizen, a veteran who leans more towards industrial gameplay, or a humble explorer of the verse, jumping into combat can be overwhelming. There's no substitute for training, but you can make your life easier in combat by taking the time to configure a number of in-game settings. Welcome to a Dogfighter's comprehensive guide to the most optimal combat settings. Stick around until the end of the video, where I'll discuss which settings can help you improve your aim. I'll be using some combat terminology in this video, however, I'll be explaining this terminology as we go, and I'll have on-screen prompts with definitions. I've also added chapters to make it easier to navigate to specific sections that you might be interested in. So let's jump straight into it. Coupled and decoupled flight is one of the most common questions I get over on Twitch. Coupled simply means that when you don't provide control input, then IFCS, the flight control system, will bring your ship to a stop, where decoupled mode will leave your ship drifting. Let's discuss the pros and cons of both. Coupled with the speed limiter can make landing easier for new players who are using keyboard and mouse, as decoupled flight in gravity requires constant upstrafe. Coupled can also be helpful for keeping your speed down in combat, however, it can also cause a target's pip to become a bit more unstable and therefore harder to hit. As mentioned earlier, decoupled means that when you're not providing control input, your ship will continue its vector, or to drift until you try to bring the ship to a stop. So why might you want this? A minor pro is that decoupled will save you fuel as you're only using the thrusters when you actually need them. But decoupled also makes your ship's movements a lot smoother, which allows you to do some of those smooth and fancy landings. More importantly, decoupled helps smooth out your target's pip in combat. This is because whenever your ship fires a thruster, it affects your target's pip. Decoupled can also make merging onto targets much easier once you've learned how to manage your speed. By default, your ship will be coupled. You can change the default option in the game settings. There's also a keybind in the flight movement section, which is the C key by default. As a little tip, I would recommend learning how to fly decoupled sooner rather than later. If you have some downtime and you want to practice, go into a solo arena commander mode, throw your ship into decoupled, and try to fly around a static object without drifting away. This will help teach you speed and distance control. As an extra tip, ensure that you have space brake bound. Especially when learning to fly decoupled, space brake is exactly what it sounds like. It brings your ship to a stop. The keybind can be found in the flight movement section and is bound to the X key by default. The speed limiter is exactly what it sounds like. It can be useful if you're new and you're not used to landing your ship, as it'll make it a little less twitchy. However, I would recommend learning to fly without the limiter as soon as possible, as using it will turn you into a sitting duck in combat. I'm not endorsing flying at high speed, but even in safe combat speeds or SCM, you do need to be able to maneuver without artificial limitations. You can change the default setting for the speed limiter in the game settings, and a keybind for turning it on and off can be found in the flight movement section. Proximity Assist was added to Star Citizen to assist players when landing. It was a well-intentioned mechanic, however, for those who low-fly or dogfight in atmosphere, it can cause a loss of maneuverability. The way it works is that it reduces the thrust output from your thrusters when you're near the ground, a pad, or a hangar. The option is on by default and it can be found in the game settings. Just bear in mind that Proximity Assist has been bugged for some time and can randomly turn itself back on, so if your ship seems sluggish, check this setting. The Total Velocity Indicator is a pair of HUD and visor elements that help you understand where your ship is going. It comes in two parts: the floating TVI, which you can see moving around you, and the fixed TVI, which is in the lower left of your HUD. So how do they work? The floating TVI is an icon that moves around your ship and shows the direction that your ship is traveling. So if the TVI icon is over a rock, then you're going to hit that rock. The floating TVI also indicates whether you're going forwards or backwards. The triangular inward pointing arrows means forwards, and the outward pointing icon means backwards. The fixed TVI on the lower left of your HUD is an excellent reference for pilots who have become disorientated. The small white dot indicates your vector, while the growing red bar indicates speed. I personally keep the floating TVI turned off as I find it distracting, but I recommend newer players keep it on while they're learning to fly decoupled. There are 3 settings for the floating TVI: always off, fading, and always on. Off and on are pretty obvious. Fading means that the TVI disappears when it's behind your crosshair. G-Safe is a G-force limiter that helps prevent your character from blacking out or redding out from high G-forces. You're less likely to encounter this in a larger fighter, but it is pretty common in light fighters. By default, it's turned on, but I keep this turned off because it limits how maneuverable your ship can be in a dogfight, which means that you'll be less evasive, and it can also make it harder to get your crosshair on the target. This setting can be found in game settings. There is also the option to keybind this setting so you can turn it on and off on the fly, but you'll need to set it yourself as there is no default keybind. It can be found in the flight movement section. By the way, here's a little tip about blackouts. When you start to see your character blacking out, strafe in the direction that your ship is currently traveling in, not against it. Use space dust and your ship's TVI to find your vector. Also, you can view the amount of Gs that your ship is pulling in the lower right of your HUD. Star Citizen offers several different ways to get your weapons on target. Fixed weapons have a very small amount of aim assist and require you to aim more accurately, while auto gimbal allows your weapons to turn towards your target. So which should you use? Some more experienced dogfighters suggest that you should only use fixed, but the fact of the matter is that you need to work out what is best for you. So let's take a look at the difference. Right now in 3.22, using gimbals means that you have to downsize your weapons. CIG have confirmed that this will be changing in the future. This generally means that when using gimbals, you do slightly less damage, so if you can aim, fixed is the way to go. So why would you use gimbal? Gimbal can help those who need a little bit of extra help with their aiming. After all, we've all grown old while waiting to answer the call. But those small weapons do have an advantage over their larger counterparts. They hold more rounds in the capacitor and they recharge faster. So while they do less damage, they're better for denying the shield regeneration of your target. Gimbals actually have 2 options, auto gimbal and manual gimbal. While auto gimbal tries to aim at the target automatically, manual gimbal uses head or eye tracking to aim at the target. I wouldn't personally try using this at range because accuracy can be an issue. However, close up it can actually be quite useful. Here's an example from my friend Aondo, who uses manual gimbal to control the remote turret on the arrow. Yes, that's a turret on the top. If you want to see more manual gimbal action from Aondo, check out the link to his YouTube in the description below. So what about the options? In game settings, you can select the default gimbal mode, auto, manual, or fixed. There's also a keybind that allows you to swap between them on the fly. Sometimes you may need to do this, as there are some flight maneuvers that pilots can utilize to evade slow-moving auto gimbals. If you want to learn more about gimbals, I'm going to be training and collaborating with Salty Mike, which will become a combat guide, so keep your eyes open for that video. By the way, if you're finding this guide useful, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button. It really helps support the channel, and if you'd like to see more guides like this one, hit the subscribe button. Weapon convergence is a setting that dictates how far from your ship your weapon fire should meet. This setting used to be a lot more important before CIG added nudging to the game. Nudging being that auto-aim that helps guide your weapon fire to the target when you're not quite on pip. However, there is still a use case where weapon convergence is useful, and that's when aiming at close-up objects that you can't target, such as people on the ground. Having the convergence up close makes it easier to hit them with multiple weapons. There are a couple of settings for weapons convergence. In game settings, you can set the default convergence range. This setting is called Guns, Fallback, Convergence, Distance. There are also a number of keybinds under Vehicle Weapons that allow you to adjust the convergence on the fly. This is a bit more useful than the default setting. However, something to bear in mind is that as of 3.22, there is still no UI support for this option, so it can be difficult to judge the convergence without firing your weapons. If you find yourself accidentally looping through the number of armed missiles in missile operator mode, there is a setting to prevent this. In game settings, scroll down to Missiles, Armed Missile Count Can Loop, and set it to No. Situational awareness is incredibly important in combat. One way to improve your situational awareness is with nameplates. The nameplates help you spot targets, but more importantly, to differentiate between multiple targets. The nameplates can also show distance. By default, party nameplates are on, but neutral and hostile nameplates are off. This can be changed in the game settings. Field of view is something that is often overlooked when it comes to ship combat, but can drastically affect your efficiency. Star Citizen is a game filled with diegetic UI, diegetic UI being a user interface built into the game world itself. We can see this in the form of the Mobiglass, ASOP and ship terminals, but also in our ships in terms of the MFDs and HUD, and this is where field of view comes into play. When increasing or decreasing the field of view, it affects the size of the UI within your ship. A smaller FOV increasing the UI size, and a larger FOV decreasing it, making it harder to see. When in combat, you need to be able to easily and quickly view elements of your HUD or MFDs, such as speed, ammo count, shield status, fixed TVI, and even the crosshair. Something else to bear in mind with the FOV is that increasing your FOV can make objects appear further away, so if you're a knife-fighting style combat pilot, it may be wiser to have a smaller FOV so you can more easily judge those distances. Before we move on, I'd like to make an appeal to CIG. Please give separate FOV sliders for in-ship and on-foot. Notifications in Star Citizen are quite frankly awful. They pop up in the middle of your screen, they're large and incredibly distracting. As of Star Citizen 3.21, we can now hide certain notifications such as friend requests and party invites. However, as much as I hate the notifications, I would like to suggest that you leave them on. Party markers in Star Citizen have been broken for about half a decade and very often disappear. The best way to get them back is to create a new party, which isn't ideal when you're in the middle of a dogfight. If this happens and a friend is trying to find you to help you, it's easier for your friend to add you to a new party and for you to press the left square bracket to accept the invite than it is for you to open your Mobiglass mid-dogfight. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're struggling with your aim, there are settings you can adjust to help both mouse and joystick users. If you're a mouse user, you have the option to use Vjoy, Virtual Joystick. Vjoy is the default mode and treats your mouse like it's a joystick, where there's a center point that you drag the mouse away from to rotate the ship, and then return it to that center to stop the rotation. There are several Vjoy settings worth adjusting from default. Out of the box, the game gives Vjoy a gigantic dead zone. This makes aiming far more difficult than it needs to be. The setting is called Pilot Vjoy Mouse Dead Zone. I recommend reducing to somewhere around 1 or below. You can visually see the dead zone around your crosshair. It's indicated using 4 circular dashes. We're reducing this because the larger the dead zone, the harder it is to be accurate aiming, as you'll kind of zigzag trying to get the crosshair into the pip. Another setting for Vjoy to adjust is the Pilot Vjoy Range Yaw, as well as the Pilot Vjoy Range Pitch. These adjust how far from the center you need to drag the mouse to rotate the ship. You can make adjustments based on your preference. Give it a try. By the way, I'm not a mouse user, so a big thank you to Jace from Ramming Department for talking me through the mouse settings. He is a very friendly motherfucker who is honestly one of the best pilots that I know and can be found streaming on Twitch. Check out the link in the description below. ESP stands for Enhanced Stick Precision. It works by dampening the input from your Vjoy or your joystick the closer you aim to the pip. This allows you to aim into the pip with more accuracy. The downside of the way that ESP works, however, is that when you're fighting someone who is jinking being a real-world term for evasive flying to avoid gunfire in a dogfight, ESP can make it harder to aim into a fast-moving pip. But this can be countered with basic flight maneuvers and/or temporarily disabling ESP. In terms of settings, the main two can be found in game settings and are called Pilot ESP Zone Size and Pilot ESP Dampening Curvature. The zone size is the radius around the pip that dictates when ESP should kick in, while the curve is how strong the effect is. Different pilots will use different ESP settings. It's a very subjective option, but for reference I use a zone size of around 10 and a dampening curvature of 1.06. From my experience, having the zone size too large can have the unintended consequence of slowing the rotation speed of your ship in a rate fight, while having the dampening curvature too high can have the unintended consequence of making it harder to hit a fast-moving pip. I strongly recommend experimenting with these settings for yourself to figure out what works for you. Don't be afraid to start with a slightly larger radius and curve and then dial it down over time as you get used to the ship's controls. If you're wondering if I use curves on my joysticks, the answer is no. My strafes, roll, and rotational axis are all completely linear with very little dead zone. So there we have it. This is how I configure my game. If you configure yours differently, let me know in the comments. If you've learned something new, I really recommend playing around with the settings I've discussed in this video to discover what really works best for you. I spent quite a bit of time fact-checking the script for this video, but if you've noticed something I missed or you have any questions, then feel free to ask in the comments. A big thank you for all the support for my rock, paper, scissors video. It was my first real video that wasn't just a rip from my stream. I put a lot of work into it, and I took some of the feedback from that video to improve the quality for this one. I worked on this video quite a bit longer than I had originally planned, as I'm kind of learning and trying to build motion graphics as I go, which I can now use in my future videos. A big thank you to my Patreons. They've allowed me to spend a bit more time concentrating on creating YouTube content. If you'd like to support the channel, hitting the like and subscribe buttons is a massive help, as is sharing the videos with your friends and org members. But if you want to take it a step further, check the link in the description below. But until next time, I've been Moist Noodle, and I'll shoot you guys in the verse.
And fall through forever. Stay at my silence, watch the seasons change together. Yeah, you got them thunder thighs.